Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, May 15th, 2025, and just a few days ago, we saw Democrat Rob Sand, Iowa state auditor, announcing a 2026 bid for Iowa governor in a huge announcement for the Iowa Democratic Party. Now, if you remember anything about our conversation about Iowa in the 2024 election, you will know that right before the election, there was a poll done that showed that Kamala Harris was defeating Donald Trump in the state of Iowa by roughly 3 points. And while I never thought that poll would be accurate in saying that Kamala Harris would defeat Donald Trump in Iowa, it did give Democrats some hope about how Iowa might vote in the 2024 presidential election, and by nature, the rest of the country. But to their despair, Iowa voted for Donald Trump by a margin of roughly 13 percentage points across the state in November, and it was a huge and suffering defeat for the Democratic Party. So then, looking ahead to 2026, almost every single Democrat took Iowa off their radar for that election. Enough so that the ratings for the state had made itself safe Republican for the governorship in 2026 with no real questions. But with the introduction of Rob Sand as the state auditor into the governor's race, the state itself has seen a massive shift in terms of expectation in the 2026 elections. A state that was written off largely because of Donald Trump's double-digit victory in the state has now become a lean Republican state, based on the Cook Political Report and many other mainstream voting networks that take a look at races on a case-by-case basis, which changed this state in what they call a rare change, moving it from a solid Republican seat to not only likely, but instead lean, making this a race that Democrats 100% are now going to compete for. And this makes sense. If you don't know anything about Rob Sand, let me give you the very quick, rundown as to why he is perceived and is very much this more electable figure than really anyone that the Iowa Democratic Party could have ran. Well, first things first, there's a lot of enthusiasm around his race given the current context of this moment. Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds, a very popular Republican governor who won re-election by massive amounts, much bigger than Donald Trump's margins in the 2024 and even 2020 and 2016 election when he won Iowa all 3 times. She decided that she was going to be stepping down and retiring and not running for re-election. Thus, it cleared the field. But in many people's eyes, it cleared the field for the Republican Party. It gave them the opportunity to really just land anybody in that seat, given that it was perceived as a safe Republican seat. But what we quickly learned was that with Rob Sand on the race, Democrats found hope again in Iowa. He raises $2.25 million in the first 24 hours, which is more than the Democratic nominee for Iowa governor even raised in the entirety of 2021 4 years ago. But looking, too, about Rob Sand, it isn't just that he can raise a lot of money. People remember that Democratic candidates raise a lot more than Republicans do, but that doesn't always mean they're going to win their election. But Rob Sand has been uniquely powerful at winning elections. Looking back again at those 2024 election results, I have to remind you that Donald Trump winning the state by 13 points means that even in elections where we're talking about midterms and other presidentials, this state is still pretty red through and through. Iowa is just as red as New York was blue in the last presidential election, to put things into perspective. So looking at 2022, what you might be shocked to know is that Rob Sand, the one who's running for governor now, as a Democrat, won his election in 2022 against all odds in the state of Iowa. And I say against all odds, again, Donald Trump won this state by 8 points in 2020, but looking at every other election that was on the ballot in Iowa, Chuck Grassley, the Republican senator, won by 13 points. Kim Reynolds, the Republican governor, won by 19 points. Looking at the House races, Republicans won every single race. And so looking at those numbers and looking at the state House and looking at the state Senate and looking all across the board, there's a lot more red than blue. But Rob Sand stood against, I guess, I can't find the word for it, but the point is that Rob Sand won. That he, as a Democrat, as Iowa auditor, won his election despite every other Republican doing super well. And you have to ask why. Well, Rob Sand is uniquely positioned that he's more popular than any other Democrat across the state, including ones that had been elected. On this same ballot, we saw an Iowa Attorney General's race that Democrats lost again to the Republican Party. You can see that it was a race the Democrats didn't lose by a massive amount, but it was a 2-point margin. And the reason I pointed out was because in 2018, Republicans didn't even run a candidate. Republicans were so afraid of losing the Iowa Attorney General's race that they didn't even run a candidate for this race 4 years prior to winning against the same Democratic incumbent, Tom Miller. But the fact is that Tom Miller, who had been the country's longest-serving attorney general, who had done very well in the past in Iowa time and time again, his time came to an end in 2022. But for Rob Sand, it didn't. Voters seemed to like something about Rob Sand. They seemed to want to vote for him. And he did better than many of the other Democrats that were on the ballot. Why? Because of these factors. Looking back at the 2018 governor election results, I remember that Iowa, despite being a state that Donald Trump in fact won by nearly 10 points in 2016, turned back into being a battleground state in 2018. In the U.S. House races, Democrats won 3 out of the 4, and in that one race where they only lost it by 3.4%. Iowa was 3 points off of having an entire Democratic delegation in a state Trump won by 10 points that was controlled and drawn and gerrymandered by the Republican Party. You can take a look at when it comes down to the governor's race, Kim Reynolds as the Republican incumbent, again, the same incumbent who went on to win by 19 points in 2022, only won by 2.8% in 2018. The circumstances of 2018 explain and show that in midterm elections, Iowa can be conducive to Democrats doing well, and in many cases, Democrats winning. And although Donald Trump won the state by a pretty massive amount, I do agree with the characterization that Iowa leans towards the Republican Party, but by no means should be anything more than that. Including Rob Sand into this Iowa governor's race really does change the dynamics of the race, because it was a race that I never even looked at as an opportunity for Democrats, and now not only will it be an opportunity for Democrats, it will also put Republicans on the defensive. It will force them to invest millions of dollars in a state they otherwise would have never worried about. Again, Iowa and New York share a partisan composition. In fact, the state of Iowa voted more for Trump than the state of New York voted for Harris, just to put things into perspective. But now, being a battleground state, Democrats are absolutely going to be contesting for the race. They're going to be fighting for the race because they know now, with Rob Sand in the race, the odds of winning have just jumped up to 33%, potentially even more. And we're only a year and a half out. And after the election results we saw on Tuesday in Omaha, we covered it in a video this morning. But the reason why it is relevant is because, first of all, Nebraska is neighboring to Iowa, but that's not even my real point. My point here is that longtime Republican incumbents have started to see their voters sour on them. What we saw was that the Republicans here ran their same candidate that they ran in 2013, 2017, 2021, and they lost. After winning by 30 points in 2021, they lost by double digits to the Democrats in 2025. There's something changing in terms of regions and areas that might not have necessarily been conducive to Democratic leadership, but also are now more conducive to having their base turn out, where Republicans just simply aren't competing to the same degree. That's what happened in 2018. It wasn't that all of a sudden we saw massive persuasive efforts where, Democrats were winning over 10, 15% of the Trump voters from 2016. 2018 was very largely about more Democrats turning out than Republicans because more Democrats were excited to turn out. 2020 was a good example of why we shouldn't extrapolate the midterms into showing that Iowa might now be a state the Democrats were going to win in. Remember 2016. Trump won the state by 9.4%, but despite all these massive shifts across the nation and in massive overperformance in states like Georgia and Arizona, flipping them for the first time since the 1990s, Biden was only able to shift Iowa by just around 1.2%. It wasn't great, but Democrats had invested tens of millions of dollars in the Iowa Senate race and the Iowa presidential, all for it to only shift the state by 1.2%. Again, when you ask why, because in presidential elections, all of those low propensity voters vote, and they voted for Donald Trump. And so the game of winning for Rob Sand won't necessarily be about winning over all these Trump voters, though I don't doubt that it helps that he has done it before, that the same people that voted for Kim Reynolds for governor and Chuck Grassley for Senate and Republican for House and State Senate and State Attorney General and State Agricultural Commissioner voted for Democrat Rob Sand. It doesn't hurt. It definitely helps that he has those voters. But 2026 will largely be defined primarily by turnout. And the circumstances around Rob Sand's announcement, building this surge of a recognition for a state that was previously written off, changing the way the races not only are perceived by Democrats, but by nonpartisan sources that do these race ratings for a living, that watch these races and make true and fair characterizations, which is why they have it as lean Republican. What we are seeing is that Rob Sand, if there was to be any Democrat who could win in Iowa, it is him. And if there was any Democrat who was brewing and building the perfect storm for Democratic victory in the state of Iowa, again, it is Rob Sand. Capitalizing on an outgoing Republican incumbent, being someone who was able to win alongside that outgoing, popular Republican incumbent, and raising the money to do so, and running in a year that isn't coinciding with Donald Trump being on the ballot, but rather in the minds of many of those voters that led Democrats to victory in Iowa in 2018. And although it does have a lean Republican characterization, which again I agree with, I think chances are today, despite Rob Sand's strengths, he does not win the governorship today. But a lot can change over the next year and a half. And it's giving him a jump start. And it's giving Republicans a run for their money, enough so that even if Rob Sand loses the governorship, the money, the resources, the time, the energy, all of it being spent in Iowa might be the reason the Democrats narrowly skate by in another battleground state. Or might be the reason that in narrowly skating by in those other battleground states might also win in the state of Iowa. It's an interesting dynamic, and it is a resurgence in popularity and conversation around a state that was previously written off as unwinnable for Democrats. But what Rob Sand is showing us is while it may not be that he is the favorite, he certainly has a fighting chance. And it's something that many Democrats were hoping and looking for in Iowa, felt very hopeless about in a state that used to be Obama twice, then Trump 3 times, that they're now seeing as a potential opportunity in a midterm, where they're hoping that will define the race, and that will allow Democrats to do what they previously thought was unthinkable. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2025 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.